thing I could really see is, because now Neuralink is kind of the big thing, right? So what if we get to a situation where people are wearing these Neuralinks, which I'll be honest with you, I never will. I don't care, you couldn't pay me enough. But, you know, they have this...
Wait till you're the only guy in your neighborhood doesn't have it. So.
I mean, that's fine. I'll be the old caveman. I will be the old caveman. I'll still drive a car with a carburetor.
We open the telephonic channel of St. New York and London.
This is Fred Capel calling from the Earth Station at Andover.
Yeah, Marty Cooper.
We are calling it iPhone.
Hey guys, so welcome to another episode of Talking Telephony. Now, on this episode, we have a very special guest. Paul Connolly has agreed to join us, and we're gonna have a little discussion about not just telecom and where it's going, but where it's been in the past. So I really look forward to this conversation. I've been looking forward to it for a long time, and Paul, thank you for agreeing to.
Oh, my pleasure.
Appreciate it. So for all those out there, and because as you know, we really speak to kind of the general public as a whole. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, kind of your backstory, what you're doing now, and take it from there?
Sure. So I'm a Canadian, grew up in Toronto. I went to University of Toronto, studied engineering. I came out and started working for, at the time, the biggest tech company in Canada, which was Northern Electric, which then became Northern Telecom, and which now no longer exists. Left Nortel in 1996 and signed on with Scientific Atlanta, which was based in Atlanta. And they were big on cable TV and video networking. And I worked with Scientific Atlanta, who were in turn acquired by Cisco in around 2007, 2008, and finished my career with them. So I really only worked for three companies, for Nortel, Scientific Atlanta, and Cisco, always on the networking side, from a designer, software coder, tester, marketing, sales, through general management, executive management, business development. And so I've loved networks all my career. I left the corporate world in 2014 and started a consulting firm, Connolly Network Insight, and worked pretty much part-time. 3 years ago, a friend of mine called, and he had an opportunity, a guy named Peter Cressy, had an opportunity with his company to bid a feasibility study for fiber for a city in Dublin, Ohio. And I helped him out with that. And so since then, I've been pretty much focused on that as far as my working life. Working with municipal governments to try and help them get into fiber to the home. So I've been a network guy from the very beginning, voice networks, data networks, video networks, satellite, wireless, now
so you kind of run the gambit then, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And you know, the interesting thing is, they're all networks, and in a lot of ways, they're kind of all the same.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you know, honestly, that's actually my first question is, because from what I hear you say, you know, you've obviously done, you know, telecom, but you also did Cat V, right? What do you feel like the biggest difference? Because especially back in, let's say, the 90s and the 2000s, there was a difference. I mean, you know, there was issues with, you know, one provide this, one provide that. And if I remember right, it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, mid-80s, GTE came out with like Ameritown USA, or so. It was like their first kind of foray into video and things like that. But since you were familiar with both networks, what do you feel were the differences, or even maybe still are the differences? And then what do you think the future holds for both? I mean, are they just kind of become the same thing either way? Yeah,
I think, you know, every network goes through cycles. You know, the telcos started out, I mean, they did voice, and then they figured out how to put data on top of their voice, called DSL. And made it a very profitable business. They owned it, to be honest. The cable guys, when they started building their networks, they were one-way only, broadcast TV, and then they realized they could put new channels that didn't exist in broadcast, like ESPN and HBO and so on, inside the cable. But they were very much into the broadcast video mode. And eventually, the cable guys started saying, you know, if we work at it, we can make our network two-way. Once we make it two-way, we can get in the data game and we got way more bandwidth than the telcos do. So the cable guys started beating the telcos on the basis of more bandwidth. The telcos responded by saying, we can one-up the bandwidth advantage by going to fiber. And the difference is that the fiber didn't exist. The whole country was already wired with copper for voice, with coax for cable, but there were no fiber networks. So even though it was the best network, it had a big cost disadvantage.
For sure.
And time disadvantage and disruption to customers and so on. But there's no question it had way more bandwidth and it was the right way to go in the long run. So that was kind of, so you see this sway in who's on top, who's ahead. The other interesting thing was when the telcos were always very, very gold-plated spec'd. I mean, Bellcore, acres and acres of PhDs, defining every edge case and testing rigorously and getting it out when it was ready, regardless, because they were monopoly price driven. They had a guaranteed return on investment, and they did stuff when it was ready. But that it worked. The telephone network always worked. Cable guys, it was privately funded. It was entrepreneurs. I mean, people joked about, chewing gum and baling wire and and a lot of different people got in, and there was no equivalent of Bellcore. Now, the interesting thing, if you look today, cable has Cable Labs, which not only specifies everything, but does interop testing, and they have gold-plated the whole specification, so all the vendors work together and so on. So it's kind of totally twisted around. Yeah. And the fiber guys, although they have ITU standards in that, they don't have that same degree of making sure everything interop tests and so on. So we kind of come full circle between how the networks get specified.
Well, that's one thing I find really interesting is you look back in the day, and of course you're very familiar, Bell Labs, and as you say, everything was kind of like, hey, gold standard, this is going to work. Because, real far back in the day, people didn't even own their telephones. Right? The telephone company owned their telephones, and if you had a problem, they'd come out and service it. Switches, PBXs, things like that. That was, unless you were some giant corporation with your own switch down in the basement, everything, D-Mark back was all, telephone company. Yeah. They owned it all. Well, one thing I think I don't want to say miss, but maybe one area where I personally kind of miss is Bell Labs having that as like our center. You know what I mean? And I get, because deregulation, of course, things broke up. We got baby bells. But, having everything like just, this is the standard. This is what we have. And granted, you're right, it's monopoly control, right? And so that's not always a good thing. But still, I wonder if there's a way to have the best of both worlds, because obviously cable's done it, right? And is that something you could foresee being maybe a plus to the industry going forward, having kind of that gold standard?
Yeah, I do think, I'll tell you one story. When I first went to work for Scientific Atlanta, when we'd go down to the boardroom, along the walls on the way down were patents that the company had won that we were really proud of, that that was helping to advance the whole hybrid fiber coax world and MPEG video, all that good stuff. So we were pretty proud of our patent plaques on the walls. Then I went to visit Bell Labs, and along the walls on the way to their boardroom were Nobel Prizes that they had won for inventing things like the laser and the transistor and the television and so there was a whole different level of focus, that basic research and so on. Yeah. But I do think that, if you look at a lot of the funding that's going on now into the biggest of the internet companies, they're spending tens of billions of dollars on R&D. Sure. Yeah. And so, all the big, Amazon, Google, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, they're pouring enormous amounts of money into R&D, and I think we're seeing a lot of benefits coming out that way. Oh, absolutely. But at the same time, I don't think the public has the same sense of, and maybe it's just me being an old guy, but people don't have the same expectations of quality, of stuff working all the time. the phone always worked. Didn't matter if the power was out. The phone just worked.
Yeah.
Now it's like, oh, the network's down, it's spinning, let's reload it. Let's just watch something else. I mean, I do think that there's a reduced expectation, because a lot of the mentality is, let's just throw it out there and see what happens, and see who complains, and then we'll fix the bugs, rather than let's test it for 2 years and make sure all the bugs are out in that. So, and there's probably a balance somewhere in the middle, but I think everything goes in cycles.
Yeah.
And I think we're kind of at the, people are willing to put up with a lot of second-rate stuff, to be honest. In my opinion, that they just, they accept it, and sometimes people just don't know any better.
Well, and I wonder how much of that goes to, because I remember, like, my parents, when they would do like lead paper cable. I mean, that's old stuff, right? And but the sleeves and everything, I mean, they were lead, and then you had to wipe the sleeves and make them all nice and pretty, and I mean, quality. It could be a 800 pair trunk cable or something, and everything about that was going to just look pristine. And I wonder how much of what you're talking about is either the network not being maintained to the same level of care as it previously was, versus are we not, and there's probably a mix of both in here, right? Are we not kind of setting a gold standard? And as you said, we have so many players now. I mean, we've got Elon Musk doing, Starlink. We've got Amazon. We've got, and of course, Verizon and all these. I wonder how much is 50-50 on that. And either part of it, it seems like we should maintain the network's better care, boots on ground guy, right? Like even to the lowest guy. He has so much passion about what he's doing because it's so important. And let's be real, the networks are one of the most important things in our nation.
Absolutely.
And so how much of it is like there's just not enough care? We haven't instilled that as an industry, like, hey, what you're doing is world changing. It's important. Have it matter. And how much of it is the other side?
I think there's no question that, the skill of the labor that's putting networks in matters. But I think the bigger issue is that the networks are all so much more software based.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, every network's getting virtualized. Yeah. So you don't have purpose-built hardware. You have generic off-the-shelf hardware, and you load software in as you need it. And software is inherently buggy. I mean, there are going to be bugs in software, and if you knew what they were ahead of time, you wouldn't have put them in there.
Right. So, it's the unknown unknowns.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But at the same time, I do think, you think back to the old days when we used to always talk in telephony about, the Mother's Day problem. Everybody wants to call their mom on Mother's Day, and you can't, and so the network gets overloaded.
That's right.
So if you try and engineer to handle that every day, you've spent way too much money. So you have to try and figure out, well, what do I do to handle that increased load, even though I know it's coming?
Yeah.
With a virtualized network, I mean, you have these storage and compute functions, and then you just load them up as you need them in real time.
Yeah.
So the networks can be very, very much more flexible if they're based on a virtualized network. So that's all good. But at the same time, I just don't know that there's a way you can not build bugs in.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think you're absolutely right. You actually brought up something I find I actually kind of forgot about, and it's funny you said it. Back in the day. We always call it the party line problem. If everybody on a party line picked up the phone at the same time, ain't nobody calling anybody, right? But the networks were never built at 100% capacity. If 100% of people on that network picked up the phone, people are getting dropped. People, can't do that. Technology now is advanced to a point where, there's obviously still situations of that happening, but there are areas where you could just about reach 100% fill. And it still works. So, I find that very interesting that we are getting to a point where we almost have enough bandwidth for, and especially as technology advances, right? And you're able to put more, and I don't want to get too in the woods or in the weeds or anything, but you're able to get more packets onto a fiber, more data onto the same strand, it's getting to a point where it's almost, I won't call it infinite, but how many spectrums of light do we have, right?
But I would say All networks are shared. There's no non-blocked network that's ever been built. There's blocking somewhere in the network.
Yeah.
And so the issue is, how do you cope with it? I mean, if you look at an event like the Super Bowl, I mean, the vast majority of people watch the Super Bowl on broadcast.
Yeah.
Because one good thing about a satellite, you can send it up once and send it down 100 million times, you know, cover the whole country.
Yeah.
It's very, very efficient to do that. If you have to unicast to every single person individually, then you pretty rapidly overload the networks.
Line of sight versus unicast almost, right?
Yeah. So it's, you know, broadcast has its place for very large common events and that. So, and, you know, sure, will we get to the point where we can unicast the Super Bowl? We will, but then people will say, gee, I want the premium 16K video with holographic audios and the, you know, or the holographic image. There'll always be some quality that demands more bandwidth than the network can deliver if we have to deliver it to everybody all at once. So there'll always be a traffic problem. And the question is just, you know, how much does it matter to the public? What is it that they want, and what are they willing to pay for? So.
Well, you know, that actually brings up a really interesting point of something I would like to talk to you about, and that is actually network security. For quite a while now, I've been kind of a big proponent of, we really need to tighten up security on our network, foreign actors, right? Hackers, things like that. The vulnerability of our network. And I say that because, like, you talk about roadblocks, right? You know, we basically have these bottlenecks. When you're talking about EMS or cell or, you know, major communications, right? I mean, there's a lot that relies on what we do.
Absolutely.
Are you concerned at all? Do you see that being an issue, especially going forward, especially with the development of AI and how virtual all these networks are getting? Right? They're all software, as you say.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, sure, I'm concerned. I think any reasonable person thinking about it would say it's always, you know, tougher to defend where you got to be right all the time, every time, versus somebody trying to hack in where they just got to be right once and get in and so on. So, but I do think, I mean, we had a talk here today on quantum computing, and I do think there's a huge role to be played there for quantum security. So, and I know that's a big focus, but yeah, I think, you know, no matter how much you build safeguards in, people use networks, people do dumb things, people have, you know, their phone number as their
or password,
or their wife's birthday or whatever, and that, you know, and there'll always be people that, you know, they go for phishing attacks, and you know, you can't underestimate the human ability to be creative when it comes to screwing something up. So.
Absolutely.
And you can't, you know, but that's life. I mean, people are using networks, and everybody's not going to be a computer expert, and you don't want them to be. You just want people to use the networks and get the utility out of them that they're meant to serve. So, but I do think, the more we scale, and the more we have the ability of networks to be global and to touch everybody with the same input and so on. We saw this whole CrowdStrike program. You know, most people have never even heard of CrowdStrike, and now they discover, and it was kind of ironic, the company that's supposed to be doing cybersecurity is the company that, you know, causes such a widespread. And I do think the other thing, Mark, is you see different companies react or get impacted in very different ways. Some airlines were way worse, more adversely affected than others. Some airlines really had software that was so old they weren't impacted because they didn't have that stuff built in, and they were okay. But you know, I think you do see that there's not uniformity in terms of how people implement their network or their cybersecurity or the way they protect themselves. That's all over the map.
For sure.
And so I think you do see different reactions from different parts of the network. But certainly when it comes to infrastructure, I mean, banking, you know, national security, I mean, there's it's worrisome that, you know, there's an awful lot of smart people around that don't necessarily have the same sense of values that
morality.
we have,
Yeah.
that the average public has, and they can hurt. So yeah, I'm concerned about that. So.
Well, one thing I remember is a few years ago when I think it was 2018, 2019, we really started to talk about IoT, right? And the connectivity of everything. And personally, my thought process was, well, if we're about to start putting, toasters, TVs, fridges, like literally everything on the net, I saw a two-pronged problem there. Number one was bandwidth. Like, we are really about to start shoving everything onto this network. And number two, the network, if you think about it in a almost like an esoteric way, it's like a spider web. It's data and light, and it travels the world, and it's connected in so many places. And unless you get, so I was about to say, unless you get totally disconnected, but now think about Stuxnet. It was able to infiltrate, right? So now you're talking about grids and everything else is completely connected to, some guy in Kansas's toaster. A smart enough person, really.
2 slice or a 4 slice?
Yeah, right. The good 4, does the bagels. But, the threat there, to me, really seems to amplify a lot. Again, a lot of bandwidth is required for the IoT, and we have the security issue of, and like you said, how do we know that Samsung or Sony or any of them are building in the protections needed to actually guard against hackers, issues, things like that? What's your thought process on that? I'd love to hear your thought process.
Yeah, I think you do have to balance the utility we get versus the risk we take. And if you took the argument that the whole system might break and it would be really nasty, we'd still be using candlelight.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have put in electricity because it could go down and we could all lose it, and it'd be big problems. So I think as we progress through technologies, we've there are always going to be risks into the technologies. People now finding, these electric car batteries don't work good when it's 18 degrees below.
Yeah.
And you got to charge them up. You think we would have known that. But anyway, so there's a lot of, but I do think there's a balance between the utility to all of us of these networks versus the risks that we take in them not working. And, we just have to work hard to make sure we do what we can to protect them. But if the alternative is don't use them, then that doesn't work either. Yeah. I think I hope that on the issues like national security and power and banking and things that, it's one thing if you can't watch TV for a couple of days, but it's a whole different thing if you've lost all your financial records and they're gone forever. And
the power's out.
Yeah, and the power's out. So, I think, it's a balance. It's a balance, so.
I wonder if it's not actually somewhat of a blessing, because as we talked about earlier about there being a gold standard, but there's blessings in diversity, and I wonder, is it a blessing that, okay, so Sony and Samsung and all these other manufacturers, all these other people, they don't run the same security, they don't run the same this, that, because it's almost like you said about the airplanes, right? Where some were affected more than others.
Yeah.
So it almost helps to isolate any kind of potential damages that there could be having these diverse ways of security and everything else.
Yeah, I think the more that you can build redundant systems, or again, systems that are independent, even better. When you have one system controlling everything, you clearly have a point of vulnerability.
Absolutely.
And so I do think that, I'm not an expert in cybersecurity or those kind of issues, but I do know that we've always had protection in the networks as best we could, diversity from a fiber cut or a CO getting wiped out by a tornado or something. So you build rings and you build
ring and rings and
and all that kind of stuff. But eventually, you can I mean, you can eliminate blocking if you just run one line from one person to every other people.
Yeah.
But you can,
yeah. Talk about spider web, right?
you get a lot. Yeah, you get a lot of connections. So you always try and find ways. What's the best balance between improving the reliability, the availability, the functionality, the protection from problems versus cost. And so we're always in that mode, I think. So
almost like a juggling act, right?
Yeah, well, economics comes in, and I think the nature of what the network's carrying matters as well.
Yeah.
If it's an entertainment network versus it's controlling the nuclear plant's network.
Yeah. Turkey Creek may be a little more important than,
and Homer Simpson's not involved.
Yeah, no joke, right?
But no, so I do think that there's clearly there's levels that you need to be willing to pay to get better redundancy, reliability, security.
Well, talking about bringing more people on to the network as a whole, we all know that there's been this big push, rural broadband, right? And I think we can all agree that the more people that you can get onto the network, that changes lives. Like it really can.
Absolutely, no question.
Whether it's schools, learning centers, just having high-speed data to people's homes.
Right.
There's definitely been a diverse route of how to do that. Elon Musk, obviously, his system. But as great as that is, and I do think that's important, at least me, and it could just be my background, I feel that physical fiber out to those areas, because then to me you have more versatility with bandwidth. There's a lot more I feel you could do with that. How important do you think that is, that push, and do you feel that us as a industry is doing enough? Because we've been saying it for years, for decades, but I mean, it's still, in a lot of these places, it's still not there. They're lucky if they had a T1 or a DSL or something. So how important do you think that is?
Yeah, I think again, it comes down to if you have alternate means to try and deliver functionality to someone in a very difficult environment. I mean, long runs of fiber are expensive. There are limits to how far the optics can reach. You're repeating or you're using more expensive optics.
Yeah.
One of the things about either, lower satellites, you can get to places a lot more easily. But again, it's limited bandwidth, even though they're making tremendous strides in terms of bandwidth, particularly up to down. I mean, again, the satellite can broadcast to many, but one-to-many is a lot easier than many-to-one.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with, I was out looking at 50 gig PON technology that's now being demoed. And I think the more difficult part is not the optics to go 50 forward, it's the ONT in the home, because you have to use time division multiplexing to go back, is to put in something that costs a couple $100 that can run a 50 gig TDM upstream reverse transmitter. That's not easy. So, So I think that it's just you have to look at it case by case. Is it mountainous? Is it just out in you're going through forests or And I think different technologies are on different improvement paths. And I think fiber pretty much is what it is. And which is very powerful, but we're not saying we're going to reach 20% farther every year with the same optics because we're on some kind of curve like that. So where the LEO guys are getting a lot more efficient, and cost there, the really cost is on the receive side.
Oh yeah.
What's the cost of the receiver, and do you have line of sight and so on?
Well, I feel like the more they can get their latency down, which of course lower core plays a big part of that. The customer base for that would grow, obviously. I mean, because nobody wants to be sitting at their house and the latency just be insane and the upload just... Because we saw that with HughesNet and them.
Yeah, right.
I'm not knocking HughesNet.
But if the latency is seconds, that's not good.
Yeah, exactly.
But they're 17,000 miles up, those old satellite networks. So, if you're a couple hundred miles up, latency depends on the application. But again, for somebody who doesn't have access to the internet, I don't think, focusing on that it's got to be ultra low latency it's not the same issue.
Yeah.
As you have
just
somebody
access,
who's,
right?
It's access. And, latency matters for voice because voice has to be synchronized in that clearly. And in the case of satellite, that was a tough part. But if you're down into milliseconds, whether it's 40 milliseconds or 10 milliseconds, maybe you can't play the latest video game, but that's not the world that you're talking about anyway.
Yeah.
For someone who doesn't have basic internet access.
Yeah.
You're looking at education, doing your homework, remote medicine, all the kind of things that, particularly in a rural community, that'd be really important. Yeah. You can't get the doctor out to every person.
Yeah.
So telemedicine's more important, to be able to access the right resources and get help and so on. So
that's such a good point, because one thing I see just in the tech industry as a whole, and we all see it obviously, is AI is becoming such a huge push, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we've gone from, almost regular chat bots to, Chat GPT-4 at this point, who's just magnificent. I mean, everyone is all about it. But if you don't have the internet access in these areas, you're getting left behind.
Right.
Not just in your learning capabilities, but your opportunities. Mm-hmm. There's people out there that if they don't have access to something like that, they're not going to be able to participate in kind of our economy as a whole moving forward. And with that, do you think it's on I have my own feelings about this, but I want to know your thoughts. Do you think the government should just say, hey, listen, we're dropping $800 billion and we're giving it to these three people and you three people go do it? Or are you more on the side of like, hey, let's get the ISPs involved. Let's get the smaller guys involved. Like, let's kind of web this out and put it closer to the community for them to be able to build out their networks as they see fit, because they're on the ground. Kind of what's your thought on that?
Well, I think for government providing money, which is our money, there's no government money.
Yeah, that's true.
Taxpayers' money.
Yep.
That is decided to be spent on solving a problem by providing an assistance so that what was a non-viable build becomes viable. That's one thing. For any time in my experience when the government gets involved in design and starts to think they're engineers and they know how to do it, that's a recipe for utter disaster.
Absolutely.
And so I don't think we want government people designing our networks. And
I don't think I want them designing much of anything.
But that's not their job. I mean, what makes the country great is that we have experts that are good at different things.
Absolutely.
And we need to unleash the people that are good at things to be able to let them do it. So I think that, there's, if somebody knows how to build a wireless network, they're the people that need to be building it. Now, they're in business to make a profit for their shareholders and their employees and, all the stakeholders in their company. And it doesn't make sense to go work this business case because they can't do it. Then that's where, can you do it if you get this pile of money?
Yep.
Yes, I can do it. Then that's good. But then give them the pile of money and get out of the way.
Yeah.
And
don't have 700 pages of
Well, and that it took us so long even to get the maps right.
Yeah.
Because nobody worked on the maps to make sure that the maps were right. So who needs the help?
Yeah.
Where are they, and who doesn't need the help? It's good if you have a good map, so you know that. And we didn't have those kind of capabilities, so we had to fix that. And then the issue of what conditions come along with it. Because, you're the government, you're trying to make sure that you do as much good for the citizens as you can. So using a part that's made here rather than a part that's imported, that seems like a good idea. Mm-hmm. But again, if it balls up the whole system, while you get that sorted out, or while somebody builds a new factory so that they can make the part that they were already making somewhere else, at half the price.
Yep.
Just to qualify for that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
No, and it seems like it would waste time and resources and everything else.
Yeah, and I haven't been involved in the details, so I don't even know if that example is real, but I suspect it probably is.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's very difficult to specify you can state what is the problem we're trying to solve, but I don't think you can say, I'm going to tell you what the solution is in every aspect, and you just then go do it. And I do think what happens is that a lot of the smaller players just say, I can't deal with this. And they get uninvolved. I mean, for a while on BEAD, they had a letter of credit requirement. Well, what little company has money to put the value of the whole bid up?
No joke.
As a letter of credit. It's like, you want to buy a house? Why don't you give me the whole value of the house for me to hold over here? Well, it just doesn't make any sense.
No.
So, but I mean, they fix that. So I do think, it's an important issue. And I do think a lot of people are working to make sure that it goes, but it just takes a long time. This takes a long time to do that. And as we heard today, about half of the states have now got a plan in place that the government has said is a good plan, and the other half are supposed to be coming. But that took a while to get that in place. And then they start with the challenge process and the sub-permitting and the sub-grants and all that has to go on before money starts flowing to people that are actually doing stuff.
And with that, that's a very, I don't know how I feel about that process, I'll be honest with you, because I look at it through the lens of, let's say, like World War II. When things needed to get done, things got done. You had the Army Ordnance Corps that was holding up things, because of bureaucracy, basically. And they as we know, the government's good at bureaucracy, right? Well, if this is such an important topic, and I think we all agree, yes, getting broadband, getting access to pretty much everywhere is an important topic. I feel like we should be cutting down on regulations, not adding to them, not putting, because regulations are just barriers, right? That's all they are. So we should say, what is the simplest way to get this initiative out to everyone without mucking it up? And I feel like, I don't want to say pulling the government out, but the government restricting themselves on adding 700 pages of regulation or whatever is the important step there with that. Have you seen them at all kind of agree with that and say, okay, we've kind of mucked up this process?
Well, I heard the speaker this morning say, we heard you loud and clear on the letters of credit and we fixed that. So that was good. I will say, if there were no BEAD money, then the one thing you do know is all these digital divide folks on the wrong side, they're not getting any network. It's not going to happen, because the reason they're there is because it didn't make economical sense for anybody to figure out how to go serve them with the technologies we have and make some money. And so, that's why they haven't been built. If they were able to be built at a profit, they were already been done. So by definition, you're dealing with the problem part. And the simplest thing for the government to do is to say, okay, if the only reason you're not building these is because, but it's not just money. If the only reason you're not doing them is because you would lose 10 million and you wanted to make $1 million profit, good, I'll give you 11 million, we're done. But it's not, it's time and effort, and, instead of building, X number of homes per week, now it takes me 5 times longer because I got to deal with all these, difficult terrain and longer runs and so on, or whatever. So I think there's not only the money, but there's a tremendous amount of effort that the companies that are going to build that stuff have to put in. And while they're doing that, they're not doing the rest of their business where they could be doing something more valuable for their own company. So I do think it's, if there's no government involvement, the problem's never going to get solved. So the question is more one of, how do we make that involvement of the government least likely to bog things down? That's the real issue.
One question I have, and you may know the answer to this, I'm truly curious about this, is telecom as a whole, we have a recruitment problem. We do. And we've known this for years, right? That we're not getting enough people into the industry at all levels, basically. Now, I personally feel, this is my personal thought, part of it's our own fault, because unlike other tech sectors or tech things, that honestly run off of us, we don't have good general public relations as a sector. And I'm not pointing to one company or the other. I'm just, most people, honestly, if you ask them, hey, how's a cell phone work? Oh, the cell tower. Okay, but how does a cell tower work, you know? The general public doesn't really understand that. And so we don't have that good foundation of the kids going like, I want to build the next iPhone. I want to build the next Samsung, you know, whatever. But then I look at it and say, okay, we have our networks now. We're trying to expand these networks into these areas. There's a finite amount of construction companies, subs, primes, and one thing that I personally deal with a lot is subs and them trying to grow into primes, and that's actually a really hard process, you know, to do. But I say, okay, these municipalities, these or co-ops or, you know, power companies or whoever, they need people that know what they're doing, that know it, because it's one thing to put a network in the ground. It's completely something different to run a network, the day-to-day. Where are those people going to come from? And do you think and my true question is like, is there enough of us, basically? Is there enough people in our industry to support all of that?
Yeah, I guess, you know, we're kind of waving into the philosophizing mode about solving fundamental societal issues. But my personal opinion is, you know, we've been so focused as a country on everybody having a 4-year college degree that's the route that you have to take, and that I don't think we've been paying enough attention to technical trades, apprenticeships, building in the pride of, you know, a lot of companies like Canada, Germany, you know, the whole apprenticeship thing puts a lot of respect and pride into being good at that trade and then being paid appropriately and seeing it as a really viable, you know, career path versus my degree in history. You know? And but I just think, you know, pendulums go back and forth. And I think we got in the mode where everybody needed to get a 4-year college degree, whether they knew what they were going to do with it or what they wanted to be in life or whatever, and ran up a lot of student debt and so on. So, but I do think it's just a matter of, you know, it's a matter of focus and society saying, you know, what do we value? And if we value, you know, and again, I go back to, I know I'm just labeled as the old guy, but people put up with a lot of mediocre stuff. That stuff that doesn't work, websites that crash. I mean, you know, half the time you get on and you know, you click the button to see what's going to happen and nothing happens. And then you can't call anybody because there's nobody on the phone. And, you know, and it just, we put up with that. We put up with that. That's what comes out as the product. And I just don't think it does us a lot of good. You know, we're racing all the time to do more and more and more. And we do a shoddy job.
What's that old saying? Jack of all trades, master of none, I guess. You know, where even and I see this in the subs a lot, is the race to the bottom, right? Money-wise, everything else, who can get it cheaper, but no one's asking, but who can do it better, you know? And maybe that's a question we as an industry should start asking. But who is, like you said, who's not doing the shoddy stuff, and how do we get everyone else to be like that, you know?
You know, I do think that things right themselves over time. You know, customers value when they start hearing that somebody has a great product. You know, they're willing to pay a premium for it. I mean, I think right now, a kind of practical issue, the fixed wireless guys for 5G, I don't think it's a viable long-term strategy for them because they're spending that spectrum in a way that's not giving them that significant a return versus using it for what it was originally acquired for mobile broadband. But they don't have the pieces of 5G in place to be able to convince you to pay more than you're paying today for your cell phone coverage. So anyway, I think, but you know, they're booming because it hooks up, it works, It gives people a good both down and upstream, and so far they're happy, and it's cheap. So they're, the customers, like people are, all the purists will saying, well, it's not fiber, and like, I don't think the public knows or cares how any of this stuff works. They just want to know when they turn it on, can they do the stuff they want to do, and what does it cost, and when it breaks, do they show up when they say they would show up?
Yeah.
And do they look reasonably clean?
Yeah.
And do they know what they're doing,
Does my toaster make the perfect bagel because it's connected to the IoT?
Well, all that stuff. Everything goes, it's like AI right now.
Yeah.
AI is in such an unbelievable bubble of hype that, and by the way, are these AI microphones?
No, they're not. No, well, sorry.
We'll carry on anyway.
Yes.
But I just do. There's no question. There's tremendous value in AI, and big companies have been doing deep learning on their networks for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, Google switched from algorithmic language translation, a deep learning based language translation, and I think their CEO was publicly said that they made more progress in 1 quarter than they had in 5 years.
I believe it.
And so the big guys have been doing this for a long time, specifically deep learning, which is neural networks simulating the way the brain works, and then hence learning.
Yeah.
The more data you feed it, the better it gets, as opposed to just machine learning.
Yeah.
But I think it's been quietly being done by a lot of people for some time, and now all of a sudden there's the big market hype about it, and there's no question there'll be progress. I'm not going to be the Luddite who said AI was a bad idea.
Until Skynet takes over.
But I do think it's like, oh my God, everybody's labeling everything AI.
What was that? There was a big. Everything was Bluetooth or something. There was a point in time, I forget what it was, a few years back, where everything had to be like Bluetooth connected. Oh, it's all Bluetooth.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, my cat's litter box has to be Bluetooth or, Wi-Fi. That was, everything's Wi-Fi. And I'm like, okay, guy, not your fork to eat your food does not need to be connected. Like, let's pull it back a little bit there.
I did a seminar a while back where I talked about the time when we started to wire up the whole country with fiber. Not for access, but for transport, fiber transport. And everybody started putting all these big fiber networks in. And I showed a bunch of TV commercials, Williams Fiber. There were a whole bunch of them that were, none of them exist anymore.
Yeah.
But that was going to solve every problem in the world, and it turned out to be really valuable to put fiber all around the country in that.
Yeah.
But my favorite was a very young Anna Paquin doing a commercial, I think for maybe MCI, saying, there's no more there, there's only here, because everything you want there with fiber, we bring it here. So.
But I like your take though. I like your take though, because you're right. Everything gets hyped because remember .com.
Same thing. Same thing. So, but then out of all that comes a nugget of value.
Yes. Yeah.
That's permanent and real, and that advances our ability to get things done and progress. So I do think the AI is the same kind of connect up the whole country with fiber. The other one that was great was a guy goes into this real seedy motel and he says, do you have food? And she said, I've got, potato chips. How about entertainment? Do you have any movies? She said, we have every movie ever made in every language.
But I can use some chips. Sorry.
Because there was a fiber coming out of the motel. That was the implication, right? Is that, and so there was a lot of, it was kind of humorous to watch them. And when you pull the clips down, they were shot in standard definition. And you think you're in a fog trying to watch them. They look so bad. And that was normal. That's what we
4x3,
Yeah. So it was kind of interesting. But so I do think that things go in cycles. All the fiber that's going in the country, I think it's a tremendous thing, and it's giving people the ability to do a lot of stuff in the future as the devices get faster and cheaper and smaller and new apps come along. I mean, I will tell you one thing I found very interesting. Last year when I went to the conference in Orlando, this fiber conference, I started asking people, what are the upstream applications? Everybody talks about symmetrical bandwidth, right? It's got to be 10 gig down, 10 gig up. What do you do with the upstream that you need 10 gig for?
Yeah.
And the answer was either once everybody has a VR headset, you know, and you have 11 kids and they're all got their headsets on, or we don't know, but we'll be ready when it is.
Yeah.
That was the standard answer. Now today I was down at the show at one of the vendors, and I actually saw for the first time an application that used the bandwidth, and it had to do with growing cherries. And so they had this big, huge cherry farm. They have cameras on every cherry, and they take high definition photos as the cherry ripens, and they transmit all those photos back to a cloud. They get service in the cloud because they only need it while the cherry is ripening, which is a couple of weeks. Then they don't need it, so they don't put their own equipment in. But it was like, you know, they're transmitting tens of thousands of high definition pictures a second back to wherever they bought the service in the cloud, so that they can sort the cherries and sell the best ones at the highest price.
Wow.
And I thought, you know, and this wasn't some future, you know, Star Wars type thing. This was how one cherry farm was running their business. And so I thought that was pretty cool. That and they showed the latency as well.
Yeah.
Every single piece, how much latency. They had assigned like 18 milliseconds for the pawn because they didn't know how far it was going to go, but they had all how much the camera took and the processing, and down to microseconds on the latency. Jeez. And this was a real example of a cherry farmer whose big company, who's maximizing the value of where they sell premium cherries, and then they also had cameras on. They had cameras on the bees pollinating.
On the bees?
Yeah. They were pollinating flowers, so they knew when the birth of the cherry took place.
Wow.
So how long it had been growing, So it was pretty astounding stuff. And it was like tens of thousands of these.
That's crazy.
Cameras, you know? So I was mind-blown, you know, and I said, well, that's not going to be in everybody's home, right?
But it's
an application.
Yeah, it was an application.
Here's a real app, and you need 25 gigs. Actually, 10 gig didn't cut it.
That reminds me of something my mother once told me. When they were putting in the first fiber in Tampa, I forget, it was 12 strand or something like that. And they said, this is the most fiber anyone will ever need. You know, there's no need. This will do all. Now to us, I mean, that's like, hey man, does that just feed like one guy's house? You know, that's nothing. You said something though, and it's very interesting to me, talking about the upstream. And I was thinking, like,
one thing I could really see is, because now Neuralink is kind of the big thing, right? So what if we get to a situation where people are wearing these Neuralinks, which I'll be honest with you, I never will. I don't care. You couldn't pay me enough. But you know, they have this.
Wait till you're the only guy in your neighborhood doesn't have it. So.
I mean, that's fine. I'll be the old caveman. I will be the old caveman. I'll still drive a car with a carburetor. But having that on the network, okay, now we're talking about human brains, you know, on the network. Now we're getting into it's like having a supercomputer, billions of them, all connect to a network.
There's no question that bandwidth will keep increasing and increasing. No question at all. But it's a matter of at what speed and what's the best way to keep ahead of it. A network operator has always got to keep ahead of the bandwidth need. You don't want to be too far ahead because you spend too much money. Yeah. But you want to be ahead of it. So, you know, I mean, I think when we first did the UVerse program for AT&T, we had a real serious technical issue of how do I get a high definition television channel on a copper line, even if it's only a couple hundred feet long. And the answer was MPEG-4 encoding versus MPEG-2. And at the time, MPEG-4 encoders, which were brand new, had just been invented, they were selling for like $30,000 or $40,000 each.
Yeah.
And they were a rack of equipment with all kinds of, expensive silicon and so on. And now in the iPhone, 4K encoder,
Yep.
running is, mind-blowingly better video than we did. And it comes as part of the chip of the iPhone.
Yeah.
So its effective cost is zero because you had to put the chip in for other stuff anyways.
Yeah.
So, we go from things that are solving problems that we think are serious, serious problems, then becomes routine. And, and I always say, like, once a technology really succeeds, it becomes invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't even know it's there. They don't, who knows what video encoding speed you need. We don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, standard definition. Everybody now has all these 4K slots, so where they don't, they don't have a 4K TV. The channel's useless to them, but eventually it'll get to be like people won't know what high definition was.
Yeah,
because it'll all be 4K.
Well, that's funny because years ago, I was working for CenturyLink in Central Florida, and they kind of made me the guy that had to, because it was all copper. They were trying to figure out, okay, how do we provide high-speed internet or video, things like that, on all our copper lines? Because we don't want to go basically plant all new fiber everywhere. It's just the cost was, there's like, okay, well, how do we do it over copper? And I ended up having to, in almost all of Central Florida, do bulk pair grooming. And I don't know if you know what that is, but basically your pairs, so just regular old pairs, right? If you have if you have bridge tap, and so, it's more than 10 feet of bridge tap. So, you've got, this is the customer, it's coming here, but you've got 10 feet of it going somewhere else. Forget data. Can't do it. Can't do it with absolutely. Exactly. And the cost of going through there and doing that was astronomical. And to be honest with you, if I remember right, and this has been a long time ago, but if I remember right, it was something like, we cannot push out farther than 900, 1,200 feet from the CO. I'm like, okay, so we're spending all this money doing all this work, and we can't even go even half a mile? I mean, this is crazy. So, but to look at, our old network, our old copper network, even though, because I get this all the time, people say, well, electricity is as fast as light. It's like, well, it's not exactly right. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, that's not the thing. So, when you look at our old network as we sit now, forget it. It could never do what we do. And so then I wonder, when we're talking Neuralink and things like that, are we talking a whole new type of network that we aren't even thinking of yet? And I understand it's more of a futurist thing, but it is an interesting thought.
Yeah. I do think there's, a lot of things go, as I've said already a couple of times, in cycles. Smart pipe, dumb pipe. Do you just provide the link and then somebody else runs all the intelligence, or is the pipe part of the intelligence? That goes in cycles, No, I think, wireless wireline convergence.
Yeah.
People are just starting to think about it. And if you're for a residential customer, the cable guys are selling mobility. They're selling 5G wireless, only available to their broadband customers as hard as they can. And in fact, they're selling more than any of the big wireless guys right now.
Yeah.
And so the wireless guys, T-Mobile just did a joint venture with 2 different private equity firms to buy fiber to the home companies with Lumos and Metronet. And so, so they're starting to say, AT&T, in fact, just the other day, John Stankey, the CEO, talked about the importance of wireless wireline convergence, but none of the fiber-based companies have a national footprint on their wireline.
Yeah.
AT&T's own old ILEC footprint, they've said by the end of 2025, they'll have passed 30 million homes, but, that's 20% of the country.
Absolutely. And how many CLICs do we have out there? And
the more the cable guys, each of the 2 biggest cable guys has over 60 million homes passed.
Wow. Okay.
And so between the 2 of them, they've got the bulk of the homes in the whole country. And it's a lot easier and quicker, in my mind, for them to build a national footprint in wireless.
Yeah.
That core, and well, it wouldn't be, it'll be a half a national in the half the country they own.
Yeah.
Than it would be for any of the wireless guys to build a wired footprint.
Yeah.
And so, who has the advantage? Then the question becomes, so what is the value of a wireline wireless convergence?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the answer is that now you have a customer that you always serve. And so you don't care where they are. Are they home? Are they on the go? You can offer them a set of services that is always there for them. And I think you can then start to do interesting things in terms of service level agreements or, offering them latency guarantees, whatever. But again, I think, that's one of the issues is what is the value of wireless wireline convergence? But I do think over the next few years, it's going to become an issue. And I think you see players like T-Mobile, obviously have some smart folks in the back room there. Why would they be doing this?
Yeah.
Why on earth would they be buying into? Now they don't have the balance sheet to do it themselves. So they're working with private equity.
Mm-hmm.
Now the other interesting thing is at&t does a joint venture with BlackRock called Gigapower to build outside their own footprint. And interestingly, they're building an open access network. Oh, wow. So they've committed to do 1.5 million homes. They've already got projects starting in 7 or 8 cities. And they basically said, it's a wholesale network. Anybody can jump on that wants to. Now, the anchor tenant that's already agreed to jump on happens to be at&t. So, so basically I could, maybe they're just building more fiber without having it impact their balance sheet.
Yeah.
Which is fine. That's a good business model. But if it truly is an open access network and other people, because I haven't seen of any other ISPs jump on now, they're not in service yet, so they're just still building them. But if I start to see other ISPs saying, hey, we're getting on that network too, because, in my experience, double margin stacking on what's already a relatively low margin business is not really the road to success.
Yeah, no joke.
But that's the way it goes. Sometimes you do that if it gives you speed to be able to get in there, but you always pay the price for splitting the profits with somebody else.
Yeah, especially when you get deep into that, right? You start stacking them real deep, and
so. But, a lot of interesting stuff going on. The open access markets in Europe are the norm.
Yeah.
So somebody builds a network and then other people jump on and sell their service competitively. And then the argument is that for the consumer, they get the benefit of competition and hence lower price. But
without 10,000 different people trying to play in the same sandbox, right? Yeah.
Going, signing people up and going bankrupt.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been around long enough, I think, to see the same problems come up over and over. And a lot of times people think they're being very clever solving what's not really a new problem, but it's already been solved 5 times before.
Yeah.
But, I also believe that you should never get too hung up with something because everything goes in cycles. Yeah. And so the pendulum swings one way, comes back the other way. And so,
the mergers and acquisitions game. In our industry, mergers and acquisitions is like water and bread, right? I mean, GTE is now 10 different companies, so is at&t, and you know how it goes. And it's like we go through a cycle of that where all these little guys kind of grow up and somebody goes, ooh, let's exactly scoop them up. Then, now you have just this one big guy, but then all these little guys come up, and we've gone back to that. And everything, like you say, does seem to very much go back and forth.
I mean, I remember, hearing a comedian talk about somebody come up with this brilliant idea. They would collect different streams from different news sources, and then they would convert it to audio and play it out. And the guy said, that's fantastic. We call that radio.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, for real.
Good idea. State of the art.
Yeah. Oh, man.
But, everybody has, people see things through their own filter. Yeah. Everybody.
Yeah.
They don't see reality. They see the reality that's been tempered by their experience.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of people are, they really genuinely think they're doing something new, and they're just doing something for the 15th time. But it has to be done.
Yeah.
If it busted or it's not getting rolled out, somebody's got to get on it. So, but I do think we're fortunate to be in this country where we have so many choices.
Absolutely.
We have the problems of, does the Starlink system work well enough?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that almost goes back to regulation or deregulation, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
Because back in the day, it was, hey, everything worked perfectly, but you didn't own a thing, right? And that almost goes towards, it's funny because nowadays people talk about, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy for it. And that's kind of a thing, right? That people talk about. But it's like, okay, but you look back in our time during certain regulations, you didn't own your phone. You didn't own anything. And, you paid for it and all that. And, they'd come out and service it, but they'd tell you what phone you were getting. They'd tell you what you'd get. You didn't have a choice in anything. Right. Now we're at a point we get a ton of choices, And it's like you said, I think that there's a lot of value in that. And we are very fortunate to be living in a country where we can talk about, we do have that diversity of options, let's say, and may the best man win, right?
Yeah. I have a son who lives in England with his wife, and he was just telling me the new government there is they're gonna nationalize the train service, because Maggie Thatcher denationalized the train service.
Yep.
Then they had like 20 different trains.
Yep.
All with different unions, and you could never get anywhere because one train either didn't work or they were on strike, or, believe it or not, if a swan stops on the tracks, the swans are royally protected.
Oh, gee.
And you can't go.
You can't pick up the.
So the network could never reliably get anywhere via train, because there was always the weakest link in the chain was always busted. So now people are saying, here's a great idea. Why don't we put them all together and have one system like, France and Ireland and, Germany do. So again, it cycles,
They'll have 20 years of that, because she did that in what, like 82 or 83 or something. Yeah.
So you fix one set of problems.
Yeah.
Eventually it causes another set of problems, and then you fix those and start again.
Yeah. And 40 years from now, somebody else is going to be sitting right here saying, so-and-so deregulate, and but now we're going to go back to deregulating it because of this and this. And
hopefully at least there'll be flying cars with it.
Hey man, we've been asking for that for like 30 years. At this point, my biggest hope is we just get a quadcopter I could like strap on my back or something. I still don't actually understand why we can't have that. It's a quadcopter, right? We see them all the time now. They're drones. Just make one big enough, and I'll just sit on the thing or something.
Imagine people smashing into each other. People can't even get on an elevator without causing trouble.
Yeah, no joke. Yeah. But by the way, for everyone, like if you hear a girl laughing at this, so that's actually Aaron back there laughing about that.
Oh, that's the way it goes.
For real.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I've really enjoyed it. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
I haven't said anything that will offend anyone. I hope I haven't. But
you know what, though? If you're not offending somebody, are you saying anything important?
Well, that's true.
So, but
I dare to think who said that. Some troublemaker.
Probably, yeah. Well, Paul, I truly appreciate you coming on here. And friend, you are welcome back anytime.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Alexander Graham Bell has passed away, but his successors shall carry forward to still greater triumphs the work that he began, and as long as man exists, the art which Bell created shall endure.